Today's video. Today is Saturday, July 1st, 2023. Happy July. Today we are going to be talking about the competitive 2024 Senate election in the state of Montana, in which Democratic Senator Jon Tester is running for re-election in this battleground state, with the incumbent U.S. Representative from Montana's 2nd District running potentially, at least, not running yet, but potentially challenging Jon Tester in this 2024 race. Now, what we know so far is that there already is a Republican candidate who has received a major endorsement in this race. What we have here is Tim Sheehy, who is currently a retired U.S. Navy SEAL, who is entering into this race as an outsider, or at least trying to do so as this Republican candidate. He enters into the race with the backing of numerous senators across the United States, including the other U.S. Senator from Montana, Steve Daines. He is joined by Senator Tom Cotton, Marsha Blackburn, Senator Mullen who currently was recently elected, Markwayne Mullen, who was elected in the special election in 2022, Ted Budd, the new U.S. Senator from the state of North Carolina, and the governor of the state of Montana, Greg Gianforte. Now, in this Senate election, it is clear that there is a Montana establishment that wants this Republican to be chosen. He comes across as this more electable Republican who isn't plagued by previous scandals, or at least so it seems. The opposition research doesn't seem to be fully out there against him, but he starts off with a credible backing. Now, of those who have publicly expressed interest, you have Austin Knudsen, who is the Attorney General of Montana and the 53rd Speaker, so he's already served in the state legislature, probably will pick up a number of local endorsements should he announce. But the main person I'm talking about today isn't the declared candidate, it isn't the Attorney General, but it's the U.S. Representative, Matt Rosendale, who I mentioned earlier on in this video, who is considering this bid for Senate. Now, this isn't the first time that Matt Rosendale ran for Senate. He actually challenged Jon Tester back in the blue wave year of the 2018 midterm elections, but it is now a new year. It is a more conservative one, arguably, and it's a presidential election year. Chances are Montana isn't going to be one of these states that drastically defies the way it votes on the presidential level. Now, Montana is quite interesting to say the least. It is a state that has elected Democrats in the past, whether it be House elections, whether it be Senate elections, whether it be governor elections. They had a Democratic governor as recently as 2021, and they currently have a Democrat in office. On the Democratic side, nobody is going to challenge Jon Tester. He has been in this very good position since the 2006 midterm elections. He's always had close calls, though. In 2006, he won by just 3,000 votes. In 2012, he won by just under a few percentage points, and in 2018 he won by under 3 points. So Jon Tester is no stranger to competitive elections. But it's the state of Montana, a state that the Republican Party typically wins on the presidential level by 15 to 20 points, that consistently seems to like Jon Tester, which is why him running for re-election is so monumental for Democrats, and why they still have a fighting shot at this state that otherwise would be so painstakingly conservative and potentially would vote against them in other situations. Now, looking at the Republican side, like I said, Tim Sheehy, or if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, please correct me down below, because I want to make sure I'm getting all these names correct when talking about them. But my point still, is that he is not a mainstream name. It is clear, as I said, that the Montana establishment, the governor, the senator, multiple senators, want him to be the Republican nominee. But in terms of where the public is, in name recognition, in preference, they want Matt Rosendale in the U.S. Senate. But that's not exactly the best news. You see, it's very similar to the trend that we saw in 2022, for instance, in the Senate elections, in which the Democratic Party did quite well. What I mean by that is, you look at the 2022 results and you ask, okay, how is it that in a year that was so beneficial for the GOP, that Democrats were able to do quite well? They picked up a seat in Pennsylvania. They held on to all of their seats, didn't lose a single one. And you ask, this was a Republican +2 national environment. And the answer was candidate quality. The voters rejected the propped up Donald Trump-style Republicans that they rejected with Donald Trump on the ballot back in the 2020 election. And when that came back up 2 years later, the voters weren't exactly thrilled at the idea of electing someone like Donald Trump. In fact, now you are starting to see the losing candidates from the 2022 midterms, like Carrie Lake from Arizona, who ran for governor, lost, considering a 2024 bid for Senate in which you see many Republicans out there saying, no, these people should not be running. The losing candidates from the last election should not be running in the next one. And that makes sense. But as I said, it's very similar in 2022 in the sense that you have candidates here who we knew were going to be the least electable options. Dr. Oz, a celebrity doctor from not even Pennsylvania, from New Jersey, running in Pennsylvania out of convenience, out of the backing of President Trump, propped up in the primary. Republican voters clearly preferenced him, but it didn't matter because the general election voters did not. That's the case of what's happening here in Montana. The establishment knows Matt Rosendale should not be the nominee for senator. Why? Because he already tried that and lost to Jon Tester in the last election. And, fairly so, this was a blue wave year. But Jon Tester wasn't managing the status quo here. He was the anomaly in these states. What I mean by that is there were Republican states here neighboring to Montana, North Dakota, for instance, that defeated their Democratic senator by double digits in this race. Indiana, a state that was very similar, in fact, nearly just 1 point in difference between Montana's 2016 margin and Indiana's 2016 margin, and yet Indiana chose Mike Braun over Joe Donnelly by 6 points. Missouri voted for Donald Trump less than Montana did in the 2016 election, yet voted for Josh Hawley by 6 points. Florida, that went to Donald Trump by just a point, defeated their Democratic senator. Why am I telling you this? Because it's important for context. Jon Tester did what many Democrats failed to do in this election, what Bill Nelson failed to do, what Heidi Heitkamp failed to do, what Joe Donnelly failed to do, what Claire McCaskill failed to do, which was win re-election in a state that Donald Trump won by double digits. The reason why Jon Tester won, number one, is because he's strong. That is an undeniable fact proven in 2006, 2012, 2018, but also Matt Rosendale wasn't this super strong candidate. In fact, when he ran for Congress back in 2020, he had a close election as well. Matt Rosendale is not this super strong candidate that Republicans should be propping up because, quite frankly, he has underperformed the top ticket Republicans in every election he's ran in. Every election he has ran in. There's a reason for that. The voters are not fans of Matt Rosendale. And statewide, propping him back up doesn't seem to be the most electable option, even though the majority of voters on the Republican side want him to be the nominee. Which is why the establishment is already coming out and pushing this guy before Matt Rosendale even announces. There's a very, very obvious push here from the mainstream GOP against Matt Rosendale, but very clearly the voters are not responding to that. And you can see here that in the general election, in polling, between Matt Rosendale and Jon Tester, there are some that show Jon Tester leading, there are some that show Matt Rosendale leading. But these margins here are nowhere near where they should be for a solidified Matt Rosendale primary victory. What I mean by that is there are voters here that clearly have a preference between Jon Tester and Matt Rosendale, and depending on the poll you're looking at, it could go either way. But if you look at the presidential results from 2020, they preferred Donald Trump by 16 points. The governor election, you see, recently elected a Republican. The Senate election in 2020, even though the popular Democratic governor was running on the ballot, Steve Bullock, lost to Steve Daines by 10 points. Matt Rosendale isn't matching any of those margins. I do think Montana will be amongst one of the most competitive states in the 2024 election. This is the map if the 2020 election results were applied to the 2022 Senate elections. But I honestly don't know how Montana is going to go. But what I will say is that for Democrats to win here, they need a perfect storm. They have lucked out in a Republican 15, 20-point state by having the right GOP candidate to run against. And in 2018, that was Matt Rosendale. And Matt Rosendale might be making that return. He's already in Congress, and his ego might be inflated from the last election. And I don't say this to knock him, but American politics is a lot about perception. It's a lot about political egos. It's a lot about whether or not these candidates believe that they can put themselves forward and can win and are worthy of victory. Well, coming off the election results in 2022, you can see that Matt Rosendale won with 57% of the vote, with a combined vote against him of about 42%. You ask yourself, why is Gary Buchanan in this race? Why is an independent outperforming the Democrat here? Well, it's because this second district is overwhelmingly conservative. It's not just 57% Republican. That 22% is a conservative vote against Matt Rosendale. Why, might you ask? Because they didn't want Matt Rosendale to win. I mean, it is literally everyone telling you that Matt Rosendale should not be the statewide nominee, and yet the Republican Party voters in the state of Montana are saying, we want him. And maybe it isn't necessarily that they have a strong like of Matt Rosendale, but it's name recognition. It's someone that they've elected before. He currently represents half the state, so they have some reason to try and choose him for 2024. Even if it isn't necessarily the most electable option, because I can guarantee you, one thing that we have to recognize as someone who's watching this video, as me who's producing this video, nobody cares. Most voters, and I mean 99% of voters, are not voting in the primary after going on the Wikipedia page and looking at which potential matchup is allowing them to have the most electable Republican in the general election. The messaging that would be done here might make a difference, but generally speaking, voters aren't pundits. Voters don't look at it from this lens of who's going to be strongest. Otherwise, Herschel Walker wouldn't have been the nominee, Blake Masters wouldn't have been the nominee, Dr. Oz wouldn't have been the nominee, right? There are very, very obvious reasons why voters back candidates, but electability is maybe popular on the national level. But as we've seen on the Republican side with Donald Trump, all the 22 nominees that I'm mentioning, now here with Matt Rosendale, and in other 2024 Senate races, that you can see a significant portion of the GOP primary voters in the polls backing candidates that are amongst the least electable. Carrie Lake leading in 2024 Senate polls for Arizona, Blake Masters doing well in them as well. I mean, there are reasons why voters back them, but when it comes down to these individualized statewide elections, more often than not, especially on the Republican side, electability is not the top concern. And considering that Montana has this regard as this solid red state, I don't think many people even think that this race is going to be competitive. But quite frankly, it will be. Now, Matt Rosendale, I fully expect to enter into the Senate race. When the Republicans came out in full force for Tim here in Montana, Matt Rosendale immediately took to Twitter. And here's what he said. Congratulations to Mitch McConnell and the party bosses on getting their chosen candidate. Now, Washington has two candidates, Tim Sheehy and John Tester, who will protect the D.C. cartel. Unfortunately for them, Montanans don't take orders from Washington. And he believes that Montanans are tired of business as usual and will reject the McConnell-Biden establishment. Isn't this fascinating? Matt Rosendale is pushing against these two nominees, clumping them together, clumping Sheehy and Tester, saying that they will protect the D.C. cartel. This doesn't sound like a disgruntled Republican who's just saying this for no reason. He has ran for this Senate race before. He sees the same polling numbers that we see. He has an election strategy team from 2022 that will likely transfer over into 2024. He is all but declared with this tweet, unless he just likes to make opinions on things that don't exactly help him with any future relationships with a future United States Senator from his home state. So chances are he thinks he will be that future U.S. Senator. And now people are worried. Well, Matt Rosendale will benefit from the fact that there is not as much ticket splitting on the national level as there used to be. Most of the states with 2 Democratic senators, 2 Republican senators, are states that vote that way on the presidential margin. The decline of split ticket voters was evident through the 2020 election. But in 2022, raised questions. We saw, will split ticket voters decide the Senate? Will they decide the House? And they did. They returned in a way that we hadn't seen before, but I don't know if they're here to stay. That's a question that voters are going to have to answer, that we will see following the 2024 election. If I was to say today, if I was on Democratic strategy, if I was running the DNC, I would want Matt Rosendale to be this nominee. If I was running the RNC, I would not want him to be the nominee. There's a consensus here. The disconnect is that Washington wants something on the Republican side that Montana voters on the Republican side do not, which is this former U.S. Navy SEAL who comes in, has been propped up by Fox News, major conservative media outlets, because they want him to be the nominee. They want to give him that name recognition so he can enter into Montana's primary with a fighting chance. But should Matt Rosendale enter into this race, I have no doubt in my mind that he wins this primary. It's his race to lose, as it was for many other candidates in the past, but quite frankly, given the fact that he already represents the state, he already ran for this election, I do believe that based off the language he's using, based off what we've seen and the polls and the discussions that have been had between top Republicans, Matt Rosendale himself and others, that he will enter into the 2024 race and allow Democrats the best opportunity at maintaining the Montana Senate race, depending on the presidential results. But quite frankly, if it isn't Matt Rosendale, the Democratic Party's chances in this state drop dramatically. But honestly, I don't see it going that way. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.